just end up taking notes and not contributing, because the value that you're going to drive from this workshop is really going to stem from your contributions as well, because I just don't want to end up speaking, for the next 2 days without giving you guys a chance to talk. I actually want to listen to some of the problems that you're facing and some of your thoughts and your questions, so that I'm able to tailor make, what I speak about according to your needs, right? Now, having said that, just one very quick question for everybody here, right? Because you guys came up for this workshop. Of course, it's going to be a direct continuation to I think the week before last week's session, where I spoke about how do you actually plan your MVP and how do you figure out what it is that you're going to build. But let me ask you a question. Is there something specific you're hoping to learn out of this workshop? Even before we get started, is there something specific you have in mind related to MVP finances? Something you hope that I'll be able to help you guys out with a little bit? Anyone? Anything specific that you're looking for? I'll be great if I speak about it. Please feel free to unmute yourself and let me know that. You can also use the chat if you want, but anyone looking for anything specific or any specific questions you hope get answered in the course of this workshop? Guys, good morning. I hope you guys are awake. Anybody looking for anything specific? I mean, you must have thought of something before coming into this workshop, right? What are you hoping to get out of it? Any particular topic, any particular question that you hope, I'm able to touch upon?
I mean, hi, am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so sir, whenever we think of seeding rounds and getting investments from outside sources, so there are some articles written over that why investment, why seeking outside investment is not a very good option at the early stages of your investment, at the early stages of your startup, right? So why is it that, and what can be the other alternative of that? So I'm thinking to seek out an answer for that question.
Okay, so basically, Aditya, you're looking for some help around understanding investments and whether it's good or bad to seek outside investment, and why, right? Fair enough. Anybody else with a similar question in mind, like Aditya's, or anybody else with something else you have in mind? Thank you, Aditya. Anyone else? Something specific you're struggling with, or something specific that you are curious about? Please feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat.
To know about like after investments, what and all we should measures, like what shares, what is shares and all. I don't know, so I wanted to learn that.
Okay, Shivani, you want to learn about what happens after investments, how do you distribute shares and stuff like that? Fair. Shivani, did we meet before, or are you meeting me for the first time?
Sir, like before prototyping stage, while pitching stage was going on, I had met, I think so.
You met me?
Like,
okay. Okay. All right. Fair. Thanks so much, Shivani. And good to hear your voice. Anybody else with any specific questions? Guys, please do not treat this like one of your boring lectures in college. I genuinely encourage you to switch on your mics, ask me questions, and contribute, because that's how you're going to get the best out of this workshop. Because if your goal is to build a company, and if your goal is to build a project that is successful, it's never going to happen until you actually open up and start asking questions. Anything else that you have in mind before we move forward?
Good evening, sir. Am I audible?
Hi, good evening.
So, sir, I had a doubt how to reach out to the big companies for investments, like, and how to make, like, how to increase the probability of their contribution in a, like.
Okay, Shatakshi, how to reach out to big companies for investment and how to get them to invest in you. Fair, Shatakshi. Anyone else? Any last question? Especially someone who's looking at something not related to investments. Anyone here with something else that you're curious about, that you want to learn more?
Sir, I had one more question.
Sure, Aditya.
Okay, since the topic is revolving around startups and new companies, so how should we budget our finances? I mean, what should be our focus at the early stages?
Got it. How do you budget your finances and what do you focus on, especially in the early stages? Cool, cool, cool. Sounds good. All right, guys. Uh, Here is something that I want to start out even before we get into the workshop, right? And again, this is coming from my past experience as well, because I've been a serial entrepreneur. I started my first company when I was 19. For those of you who don't know me, while I was still in college, and I've started multiple companies ever since. I've done everything from pitching to investors, raising investment, bootstrapping my company without taking any external investment, being successful, scaling it across, to a global presence. I've been through that whole journey. Something that I want to remind everybody here is that most first time entrepreneurs are very obsessed about investment, right? And rightly so. I remember when I was in college, it used to be a question on most people's mind as well, because everyone is trying to look at investment. Because that is the sexy part of entrepreneurship. As it seems. Of course, now with Shark Tank, India becoming so popular as well. For this has just gone way up, where everybody, the first thing that people usually think of when they get into entrepreneurship is investment, but there's something very important I want to tell you guys, and I learned it the hard way, but I just want to tell you guys this is that while most people and most first time entrepreneurs are obsessed over investment, if I were an investor on this call right now, and Shatakshi, Shivani, Aditya, if I had my checkbook with me, and if I promised to give you guys $5 million on this call, don't ask me, okay? That's not the money that I'm carrying around. But just for the sake of this conversation, let's assume that if I had $5 million to give away right now, and I asked you just one simple question, which is, can you, Shatakshi, Aditya, Shivani, can you give me a detailed breakdown of how you're going to use every dollar of the money that I'm giving you? I want you to give me a detailed breakdown of where you're going to put that money, when you're going to put that money, and why you're going to put that money into place. Break it down in like week by week and month by month and year by year for the next 3 years. Show me a detailed breakdown of what you're going to do with the $5 million. Show me why and show me when. If I were to ask you that question, most first time entrepreneurs do not have an answer to it. And if you think you have an answer, you don't. You're going to learn that in this workshop. The reason being, most of us are so focused on getting investment, which just seems like this very, very unreal, like a very unreal, sexy part of entrepreneurship. While most people are focusing so much on that, very few people really understand what to do with money. It's not easy, like forget $5 million. Even if I were to give you 1 lakh rupees, right? And if I were like, you have the money, use it for whatever purpose you want, you would be struggling to use that money for the reason. In fact, let's talk about the thingQbator program itself. I'm aware that the teams are struggling with using their money, right? So having money is it's a luxury that most of you have access to because you guys are a part of the thingQbator program as well. But knowing what to do with that money is a whole different thing. And that is where a lot of startups really meet their failure because they have absolutely no idea how to deal and manage finances, which is a very tricky concept of its own because this is not something that is taught to us. So I'm going to do a lot of focusing in this particular workshop on first you guys understanding the basics, right? It Most people assume that they understand it, but you don't because once you start dealing with it, you realize how it is. You're very soon going to have a team. Hopefully, you guys become real companies someday. If you become a real company someday, there's going to be people whose livelihoods depend on you. You're going to be paying people salary. You're going to be literally running the homes of people who work with you. It's a huge responsibility. And if you do not understand how money works, you are doomed for failure, right? So even before we get to investors and investing and pitching and all of that stuff, which is very advanced stuff, even for me, like I bootstrap my company together with my team to success even before I could start another company and then possibly even consider VC investment, right? Because it's a whole different game. It's extremely advanced. It's not as easy as it sounds. But where things go wrong, first of all, is just understanding how finances function. How will you even calculate what your expenses are? Most people don't even know how much money you want to ask for, right? So we're going to get into some of those basics first in this workshop, and then hopefully over the course of tomorrow, I will be able to answer specific questions that you may have related to your projects. Does that sound good, guys? Give me a thumbs up if that sounds good, or just let me know in the chat. Sounds good? Yeah. All right.
So
Now, this is me not going to spend any time at all on this slide. Best way to read up more about me is just Google for me. This is for people who've never met me before. Just Google my name. I know it sounds extremely obnoxious to say that, but it literally is the best way to find information about me. You guys want to follow my work? I'm most active on Instagram in terms of just knowing where I'm in the world and what I'm working on. But the only two things that you should remember, in the course of what I'm going to teach you guys is that number one, I have been a serial entrepreneur and especially a student entrepreneur myself. So I know the challenges, and a lot of things that I'm going to be talking to you guys about is just stuff I wish someone told me when I was in college, right? Just like you guys. It's just stuff I learned and it took me a lot of years to realize. So most of the stuff in this workshop is based on actual experience. And at the same time, I'm an engineer and I've designed several products. So I do have the engineering background as well to kind of understand the context behind what it takes to build, especially tech products, what goes on behind the scenes, and then also, tying that back to the topic of this workshop, which is helping you guys out with budgeting, planning, finances, and just making some estimates and projections, right? Now, let's get to this stuff. Again, as I mentioned, uh, right there is a picture of me when I was 19 years old back in college. I was a student entrepreneur. All the advice that I'm going to give you guys is actually advice that I would have given to myself. There's a quote by Austin Kleon that I really love. Austin Kleon is a writer and artist, which is all advice is autobiographical, which means anything that I tell you is what I would have told myself if I got to meet the younger me, which you see in the picture, sitting in the college dorm room. Just stuff that I would have liked to tell my younger self, in order to sort of figure out a lot of things, not the hard way, right? Now, uh, again, the shortest distance between two people is a story. I keep reminding everybody I meet about this. It's just a central philosophy that I have in life. All of my products, all of my companies, the way I operate is built around this. I love stories. I love exchanging stories. I love hearing stories. So, you guys have anything that you want to share, please feel free. But this also extends to entrepreneurship. Your customers are going to connect with your story even before they connect with uh, your company, right? And Shatakshi, you asked me a question, if I'm not wrong, which is how do you really reach out to other people and get them interested in you? The answer to that question is right here. People are interested in your story even before they're interested in your product. Nobody out there looks at your product and is like, I want to set up a meeting with these people or I want to get on a call. Very rarely that happens. People first connect with your story. So it's essential that you are your most authentic version when you are out there speaking to people. It doesn't matter, customers, investors, your users, whoever it is, you've got to bring your most authentic version because your story is what is going to bridge the gap. And then they find out about your product, service, company, whatever, right? Again, not going to spend time here because most of you know me, but been doing a lot of work on the field, been working around the world, several countries. I've personally been to more than 15 countries so far, working on different projects. But I want to again bring it back to the fact that just a quick refresher from our last workshop that one of the key pieces of skill that I hope I can impart is really for you guys to start looking beyond your sector, for you guys to start looking beyond what you're building right now, to start really looking at the whole world as a collection of interconnected systems so that you can draw inspiration from outside your sector, right? And you guys remember the Coca-Cola and Gates Foundation example? For those of you who were there in the last workshop, Aditya, Inchana, Huda Javid, you guys remember? Sukruti, I know you were there as well. You remember the Coca-Cola and Gates Foundation example?
yes, sir.
Yeah, cool. All right. Now, this is just a refresher from what we've already covered, but I want to jump straight into what we are doing here today. Now, the first thing that I want to start with, and this is usually the most basic tool out there that you can use to figure out your finances and also plan your operations a little bit. Again, this is going back to the question first of, even before you raise investment, even before you understand, revenue and all of that stuff, you have to first understand finances. You have to understand how do you plan for your project? How do you really understand everything that you're supposed to do and the money that it's going to cost so that you're able to make financial decisions, right? That's key. That is literally the starting point. Now, having said that, there is this tool that is available out there. In fact, it's available on the internet. It's not a tool that I created, but I'm going to show you a way to use this tool, which is slightly different from what you may have learned otherwise. And it's just a way that makes intuitive sense to me. It's just how I like to use this tool, whenever I'm starting a new company or whenever I'm reassessing, the operations of my own company and just planning out finances. It's just my personal way of using this tool, which makes a lot of intuitive sense to me. And I've shared this with other companies as well in the past, including some companies and founders that I've mentored that have ended up in Shark Tank India as well. So I'm going to use this tool in a slightly different way, just for you guys to understand how do you really map out everything that's happening and going on in your company and make better decisions, right? So the tool that I want to speak to you guys about is this, which is a business model canvas. It is something that you may have already seen somewhere else, but I want to stop for a moment and ask a quick question. Does anybody here know what a business model canvas is? Has anybody here seen this before? Do you know what this is?
Yes, we
10, 9,
Okay. What is a business model canvas? Like, do you know what this tool is?
0.
basically we try to fill out these columns, these boxes, and try to get an idea of how typical or how a business is going to function.
Okay. These are just boxes that help you understand how your business is going to function. Fair, fair. Anyone else? Anyone else who's seen this? How many of you guys have seen this before and you know what this is? Can you raise your hands? How many of you guys know what this is here on the screen? Aditya, fair. Anybody else? Shatakshi, okay. Huda, Javed, Shivani, cool, cool, cool. Okay, fair. Jay Kumar as well, I see your hand. All right. Now, for those of you who don't know what you're looking at, this is essentially a framework that is called the business model canvas, right? And it has, okay, so this is typically used for startups of all sizes, and it has 9 blocks, right? 9 blocks, and each block represents a certain aspect of your business that you need to figure out, right? It's just a certain aspect of your business, of your startup, of your idea, of your project that you need to figure out in order for you to be able to plan its finances, its operations, and really, be prepared even when it gets to a growth stage, right? So the names are very self-explanatory of what they concern. So you have value propositions, key activities, key resources, key partners, cost structure, revenue streams, channels, customer relationships, and customer segments, right? Now, these are all phrases that you may have come across in other places as well. You may already have been using it. For example, customer segments is something that you guys have been using in your pitch decks as well, which I'm aware of. But all 9 of these are aspects of your business that you need to figure out. Now, all of that stuff is clear, and those of you who have known what a business model canvas is, you will most likely know this part as well. But here is something very important that I want to talk about, which is if you are really starting out, which Aditya mentioned, if you're a very early stage startup idea or a very early stage project, still, planning your MVP, and if you were presented with this canvas, how do you really fill this? Because there is a way of filling this particular canvas if you were to do it on your own, which will make a lot of intuitive sense once I share it. But there is a particular way of going about filling each of these boxes, which is what I want to focus on. And I'll also tell you why it makes a lot of sense for you to do that, right? Now, what I'm going to do is, let me ask this question to all of you and let's see if you guys can get it right. We'll go one box at a time. But the first question that I have, very simple, is if you were starting out at the stage that you are in right now, what is the first box you feel we should answer? सबसे पहला box कौन सा है for which you need to figure out the answers and you think you should fill in? Where do you start? Any guesses?
So value propositions.
Value propositions, okay. Huda
So,
Javi.
key activities.
Key activities, Shatakshi, okay. Huda Javi, what were you saying? Sorry.
Customer segments.
Customer segments, all right. Anybody else wants to give it a shot? Let's see if you get it right. It's like a game. All right, let me answer this for you. The first box that you should start with should always be your value propositions. That's number one, right? You start from the center, value propositions, because if you don't know what value you're providing to your users and your customers, then you have no right to exist in the first place. That is number one. So value propositions, basically uska matlab hai aap kya bech rahe ho? What are you selling in the first place? Like what value are you bringing to your users and your customers, right? Are you bringing something that's new? Are you helping them save time? Are you giving them a wide variety of options? Are you creating something that's extremely personalized? What is the value that you're providing to your users and customers while solving their problems? That's number one. That's always what you should begin with. And you need to make sure that you know the value that you're providing as the starting point before even attempting to fill anything else. So basically, the first thing you need to figure out is what are you selling in the first place, right? Like, what is it that you're bringing out and why are you doing it? Like, why would people really be paying for something that is fast or something that can be personalized or whatever, right? So that's value propositions. You start from the center. What do you guys feel we should tackle next? So we know what you're selling and why you're selling it. What should we fill next after value propositions? Any guesses? Any guesses? Please don't be afraid of being wrong. Treat this like a game. Let's see if you get it right. I'm not grading you. This is not an exam. What should we fill next?
Customer segment.
Customer segments.
Customer segments, okay. Anybody else with a different answer? Increase your chances of winning. Neelan and Huda Javi feel it's customer segments. Anyone else? You know what you're selling and you know why would people pay for it in the first place.
Sir, I think we should fill key partners in second place.
You should fill key partners. Okay, why, Aditya?
I mean, once we know what value are we selling it to the customers, we should know that with whose collaboration are we going to fulfill that agenda, right?
Okay, fair enough. And Huda, Javed, and Neelan, why do you feel it's customer segments?
Because once we what are the values we are proposing, we should know for whom are we proposing to.
Okay, fair.
Same.
Javed, what do you feel?
Same thing. I wanted to say the same thing.
You want to say the same thing? All right. Let's see who wins. So once you know your value propositions, the next thing you want to figure out is customer segments, right? It's very simple. Once you know what you're selling and why would people be paying for it in the first place, you immediately want to figure out who are you selling it to. Like it's very clear to make that decision. Forget about everything else and the rest of the world. Forget about who's going to help you, how it's going to happen. Forget about all of that stuff. If you know what your value propositions are, you need to immediately figure out who is really looking for these value propositions. Who are you going to sell it to? Who are you solving the problem for? Your customer segment. Right now, when it comes to customer segment, you want to be as nuanced and as specific as possible. You guys have already worked on your user and customer personas. This is where you plug it in. Again, remember the difference between your user and your customer. They may be two different stakeholder groups. We discussed this in the last workshop, right? That the people paying for your product may be very different from the people using your product. Sometimes for certain industries, for example, the toy industry, people buying the product as parents, but people using the product are kids. If you are building a product of that type, make sure that your user and customer segments are separated. At the same time, a single product may also have multiple different customers or customer types as well, right? So you can have a multi-sided platform, for example. Let's take the case of Amazon, the Amazon e-commerce marketplace. When it comes to Amazon e-commerce marketplace, you have buyers, you have sellers, and you also have delivery partners, right? So the same e-commerce marketplace platform has a different onboarding process for sellers, for their verification, their onboarding. There is a whole seller dashboard and there's a whole seller user flow. At the same time, you have something very similar for buyers as well. Most of us are buyers, and when we create an account, go into the platform, there's a whole different experience. But it's very important for you to take all of those stuff into account, put it into a place, and I would really recommend you guys taking this, pasting it on your walls if you have to, and getting all of those feedbacks. It just helps a lot for you to visualize what's going on with your company and really encourage your brain to think in new creative ways. So value propositions, what are you selling and why would people want it, why are you doing it, and then immediately try to figure out who are you selling it to, which is your customer segment. Any guesses what we should fill next? Any guesses what's next?
Channels.
Channels, Shivani. Okay. Anyone else wants to try? See if you get it right. You know what you're selling and you know who you're selling it to. What is next? Shivani says it's channels. Anybody else with a different answer? And anyone who agrees with Shivani? See if you get it right. Give it a shot. Shivani, let me ask you in the meantime, why do you think it's channels that we should tackle next?
After the product is ready, we should sell it through some means, like any means, like social media or anything. So first, like to get a medium, we need channel.
Okay, fair. So you're trying to figure out what means do you use to sell your product? Fair. Okay. Anyone else wants to give it a shot? You have a different answer. Unmute yourself. See if you get it right. No? All right. Let me give you guys the answer. Shivani, congratulations. You are right. The next thing you figure out is channels. So here is how it goes. You know what you're selling, value propositions. You know who you're selling it to, customer segments. The next thing you want to figure out is how are you going to sell it? Right? How are you going to reach those people? How are they going to find out about the existence of your company, of your product? How are they going to place an order? How are you going to deliver your value, right? Like, is it a product that anybody can use online? Is it a product that needs to be physically available for them to be able to use your service? All of that stuff. How are they going to, for example, if they need support, after delivery, how are you going to provide it to them? So you need to figure out, and I'll get into a little bit more details about channels, or you can also call it delivery channels or distribution channels. There are multiple stages inside the channels as well, which I want to touch upon, but you figure out what you're selling, who you're selling it to, and then how are you selling? How will you reach those customers? How will they find out about you? And then how do they make a purchase? How do you deliver your value? And how do they continue, of course, receiving support as a part of a community if that is what you're building, right? So distribution channels is what you figure out next. That's number 3. Any guesses what should be next after this? We know value props, we know customer segment, we know our distribution channel. What should we figure out next? Guesses, guys. Don't be afraid of being wrong, not an exam. Give it a shot.
Key partners, I think.
Key partners, okay. Shivani, anybody else? Don't be afraid of being wrong. Tell us what you think should be next, and also tell us why. It's going to really help all of us understand your thinking and see if you're correct, and you learn something new in the process. What should we fill next? Shivani says key partners. Anyone else with a different answer? Sorry?
Customer relationships.
Customer relationships, Nyanesh. Okay. Okay. Shivani, why do you think it should be key partners?
Like channels are built, but like proper, like if we are doing something like for institution, means they are the key partners who will be helping us to advertise like that.
Okay.
I think
Okay. So you feel that partners are important for channels. Fair enough. Shivani and Anish, why do you think it should be customer relationships?
Like, sir, now we have decided the customer segments in the channels. So how well do you support the customer?
Okay. Okay, fair enough, Janish. So you're basically looking at how do you now support the channels, how do you support all the customers that you've managed to reach out to. Fair. All right, so Shivani versus Janish. Let's see who's correct on this round. Janish, you are correct. It is customer relationships that we figure out next. And here is why, right? Shivani, Janish, and for everyone else. When you know what you're selling, who you're selling it to, and how you're selling it, a very important key piece that most people forget is that you need to figure out how are you going to build and maintain relationships with your customer base. You guys have heard the phrase repeat customers, and I know that a lot of people here are thinking of a subscription model, right? Like that is the business model that you want to get into, subscription model. But what most first time entrepreneurs do not understand is that in order for you to keep your customers paying year on year, month on month, they have to keep seeing the value in doing business with you, or they have to keep seeing the value in your product and service, even beyond the first time they use it. For them to be able to do that, you have to also maintain relationships, customer relationships, which means that how do you actually make sure that you can maintain good relationships with your existing customer base, right? For them to continue getting support, for them to continue feeling like they are a part of a community. Most companies and brands out there, like most of the big brands that all of us really care about, they have amazing customer relationships, right? Like everybody from Netflix to Nike to Apple, their customer relationship is extremely strong, and it's one of the strongest suites. So you need to figure out how to maintain relationships with your existing customer base, or you're going to lose them. But also at the same time, how do you build new relationships with future potential customers? Now, this is a very important aspect that most entrepreneurs, first time entrepreneurs, do not realize, is that just because somebody is not your customer right now does not mean that that person will not change their mind later on. You need to continue maintaining relationships with even people or businesses who are not your customers right now. You have to continue maintaining that relationship for them to continue seeing value in you, because the first people that they're going to think of when they face the problem and they think of the value that you're bringing in is going to be you. You need to make sure that you're on top of your potential customers' mind. Even if they don't want your service right now, you need to make sure that your relationship with them is strong enough that when the time comes, you are absolutely ready to build that relationship. Now, so far, we've looked at value props. What are you building? What are you selling? Customer segments. Who are you selling it to? Channels. How are you selling it? How will they find out about you? How will you reach out to them? How will they place an order? All of that stuff. And then relationships. How do you build and maintain relationships with existing customer base and also future potential customers? Great. Any ideas or any guesses what we should fill next? What should we figure out next? What do we figure out next, guys? Any guesses?
Key partners, sir.
Sorry, Nanish.
Key partners, sir.
Key partners, okay? Key partners. Anybody else? What should we fill next? Your odds of getting it right are pretty good right now. We don't have too many boxes left. What do we fill next? All right, Ganesh. Thanks for that. I'll tell you what we fill next. We fill key activities. Now, here is why. When you have filled out everything on the right side that we just discussed, you are actually in a pretty good position to make a list of all the activities that you need to perform as a company, as a team, in order to fulfill everything on the right side that we discussed, which means that if your value proposition is that your service is going to be extremely fast and very personalized, if your customer segment is, let's say, working bachelors in metro cities, if your channels requires you to have, let's say, pop-up ads, social media campaigns, if it requires you to have cash on delivery, if it requires you to have, for example, an replacement guarantee, right? And at the same time, if you know that your customer relationship, in order to build and maintain your customer relationship, you need to set up, for example, call centers, newsletters, all of that stuff. You're now in a position under key activities to make a list of all the activities that you need to perform as a team in order to fulfill everything on the right. So this could extend right from product development, app development. You need to set up a customer relations team. You need to set up, like, uh, let's say a helpline number that people can call. You need to set up a social media ad campaign. You need to, for example, set up a team that looks at returns and replacements. You need to get in touch with a logistics and delivery partner, because you're going to look at both delivery as well as returns and replacements. You are going to, for example, let's say, set up enough capital for you guys to have, in order for you to fulfill orders that have cash on delivery, because they're very cash and capital intensive orders, stuff like that. You are now in a very good position to be able to make that list. Most entrepreneurs usually start from key activities or key resources or key partners, where you're trying to think of where do you spend your money. But the problem is you have no idea where you're going to spend your money, right? Because you haven't figured out the stuff on the right. Now you're in a position where you can make a list of those activities. So key activities is what you fill next. Any guesses what we should tackle after this? What should we tackle after key activities? Any guesses, guys? Key resources, key partners, cost structure, revenue streams. We just have 4 options left. Your chances of getting it right are pretty high. Any guesses? Jnanesh, Shivani, Neelan, Uda Javi, Shrutakshi, any guesses?
I
Okay,
think
let me give you the
key resources.
key resources. Shivani, all right, all right. Why do you think it's key resources, Shivani?
It's like random guess, like
It's a random
after
guess,
key
all right.
activities, we should find resources first, then we can go to partners.
Okay,
Right,
fair. Shivani and everybody else, please go for random guesses and right in life. There's a very high chance you'll get it right. Key resources is what you fill next, but it's not actually random. Here is why filling out key resources makes sense at this stage. When you've made a list of key activities, right, as the previous step, you are now in a very good position to make a list of what resources do you need to perform those activities and why do you need those resources, right? You're in a very good position to be able to make that list. For example, if in key activities you wrote that you will have to figure out a delivery partner, under key resources, you can now start looking for delivery partners, right? If in key activities you wrote that you will need to provide legal help in case something goes wrong to your users, you will have to set up a legal team, within your company. So if in key activities you wrote that we are going to have to onboard influencers, in your key resources, you need to have somebody looking at influencer relationships, right? You need to hire a person who does that. You're now in a very good position to write down the list of resources you need in order to perform the key activities and why do you need those resources. Now, as we speak of resources, there are 4 kinds of resources. Of course, we don't have the time to get into the details of the business model canvas, but you guys should know that there are 4 kinds of resources typically, any team or any company looks at. You have financial resources, very simple, money. You have human resources, right, which is people. You have intellectual resources, which is skills, and then you have physical resources, which is things like laptops, office space, table, chair, furniture, all of that stuff. So financial resources, physical resources, human resources, and intellectual resources. Now, I want to make a key distinction between human resources and intellectual resources. Human resources are people and intellectual resources are skills. Why is it so important for you to understand this distinction? Is because sometimes when you are, especially an early stage company, you will very often have to make the decision between hiring someone versus acquiring that skill yourself. Let me give you an example. If under key activities you wrote Android or iOS app development is one of the activities that you will have to do, And if you do not know how to make iOS apps, you have a choice. You can either hire a developer who can make an iOS app for you and join the team, or you can learn how to make iOS apps as a skill and therefore make it yourself, right? So you have a choice between human resources and intellectual resources a lot of times. It's important that you make that decision well and understand what is a skill that you can acquire versus what is a skill that you really should hire somebody else to do it for you. It's a very important decision you need to make as a leader of a team, of a project, of a startup, whatever you want to call it. But that distinction is very important for you to understand, right? So key activities, and then you can fill key resources. What should we fill next? We literally have just 3 boxes left. What do we fill next? Any guesses? Shivani, you want to make another random guess?
Cost structure, I think.
Cost structure. All right. Wrong this time. It's key partners. Why key partners at this stage is because once you know the key resources that you require, you can now make a list of partners that you need for those resources, right? You don't do this in the beginning. You don't do this when you're doing your channels or your customer segments. You do it only once you figure out your key resources. Partnerships are made for resources. For example, if you don't know the legal aspects of, let's say, international trade, you may want to have a partnership with an advisor who joins your company and really helps you understand that aspect of it. Or you may want to actually have a partnership with a legal firm that specializes in international trade litigations to be able to help you, with that particular intellectual resource requirement, which is understanding the legalities of international trade, right? So partnerships are always formed on the basis of resources that you need but currently lack. That's how you make sure that you have an effective list of partners that are really able to help your startup grow, right? We have cost structure and revenue streams left. What do you think we should fill next? Any guesses, guys? What do we fill next?
Cost structure.
Cost structure. Okay. Anybody with revenue streams? तुमको लगता है अभी पैसा कैसे बनाएंगे ये बात कर लेते हैं. सबसे important चीज अभी तक बात ही नहीं किया हमने. Anyone on team revenue streams? No? Okay. Shivani is right. Cost structure is what you figure out next. Now you are in a very good position. Remember that question I asked you in the beginning, which is, if I had a check of $5 million for you right now, and I asked you the question, where are you going to spend money in your startup? Show me a breakdown. Show me why you need to spend the money there, and show me exactly when you will spend the money. That whole question, you can only answer it now after having figured out all of those 7 things that we just discussed, because now you can look at your business model canvas and you know exactly where are the places you will ending up spending money, why you need to spend money in those places, and how exactly is that going to contribute. So you're now in a good position to understand what your costs are, what your expenses are, 2 different things: fixed cost, variable cost. For example, if let's say you will be able to say that you need to spend money, let's say setting up a legal team. Why? Is because one of the key activities is that you're going to provide legal help to your users because they're going to be performing international trades on your platform. Why do you need to do that? Because in order to build a relationship with your traders, you need to be able to offer, because a lot of litigations end up happening, and so on and so forth. You can always trace your answer back to all of the 7 blocks on top, which is why it's a pretty good time right now for you to have full clarity on the expenses and costs that you're about to incur, so that you're able to make a pretty solid financial and a budgeting plan. So cost structure is what you fill next, and only after you've done all of that are you now in a pretty good position to understand your revenue streams, which means now you're able to look at this entire business model canvas and you're able to figure out where and exactly how are you going to make money, how much money are you going to be able to make, what your profit margins are going to be. But not only that, is there also a way for you to make additional sources of income, right? For example, I don't know if you guys know this, but Airbnb, their main business is having properties listed on their platform that you can rent. That is how they make their their main money. But they have 2 other mediums of making money. Number one is the fact that Airbnb has its own payment gateway platform. They figured out that so many people are going to make payments on our platform online. It just makes sense for us because that's a key activity that is going to be performed. It's a resource that we anyway need. So they realize that if they set up and create their own payment gateway infrastructure, all the money is going to be routed through their payment gateway. So instead of them paying, for example, a 2% fee to Stripe or Razorpay, they can actually now charge that fee to the customer, and that is how they can bring down their cost, and they can figure out another way of making money, which is by the fact that you use Airbnb's payment gateway infrastructure to make payments. Not only that, but they also have a photography service that you can take. So if you're a new host and you want somebody to come and take photos, high quality photographs, in order to increase the chances of someone booking your property, Airbnb has a premium photography service through which they also make money. And they were only able to figure it out because they realized that photography is a key activity that anyway needs to be performed. So how about we, convert that into a revenue stream for us? So now you're in a good position to do that. So quick recap, you start with value propositions. What are you selling? Customer segment, who are you selling it to? Uske baad channels, how are you selling it? And then customer relationships. How will you build and maintain relationships with current as well as future potential customers? And then key activities. What are all the tasks and activities you need to perform as a team to do everything on the right? And then key resources. What resources do you need to perform those activities? Key partners. What partnerships do you need to form for the resources you need but currently lack? Don't just form random partnerships. And then cost structure. Where are you going to end up spending money? What are your expenses? What are your costs to do everything else on top? And then finally, revenue streams. What are the different streams of income for you? How much income will you be able to make? And what your profit margins are is what you can fill out, at the end. I don't know if you guys realize this, but the way we filled this is that we started at the center, we filled everything else, everything on the right, and then we filled everything on the left, and then we filled everything at the bottom. The reason I said this is how I like to approach it, and this is how it makes intuitive sense to me, is because if you look at the human brain, right, where you have the left brain and the right brain basically deals with emotions, empathy, social intelligence, all of that stuff, and the left brain deals with details, reality, analytical, sequential things, patterns, and more logical decisions, right? So the right brain is more to do with creativity, empathy, and emotions, and the left brain has more to do with analysis and logic and practicality. If you look at our business model canvas as well, everything on the right side has got to do with your customers. That's where the empathy and the emotions and the creativity comes in, which is why we started from the right. You have to figure out your empathy, creative quotients, and figure out everything related to your customers even before you can imagine trying to do everything on the left side, which is logical and analytical and practical, right? So you start from the right, everything on the right deals with your customer, hence emotions, empathy, creativity. Everything on the left side deals with logic and the practical reality, right? Resources, partners, activities. So you start from the right, which is your emotional and empathy side. Then you move to the left, which is your logic, analysis, and practicality. And then finally, you fill what is at the bottom because that's your foundation. Finances are the foundation of the startup as well, apart from your value system, which is the most important component of the foundation. But you need to figure out your finances, otherwise everything else on top will crash, right? So that's just the way of thinking that makes sense to me. Start from the right, empathy, customers, all of that stuff. Move to the left, practical analysis, all of that stuff, and then finally figure out your foundation, which is your finances. Make sense, guys? Any questions? Any questions? We good? Yeah? Okay. Perfect. I want to give you guys a very practical example, okay, of this. Does anybody here know the story of Amazon in the early 2000s and how they grew to be, the e-commerce giant that we know them to be right now? Anybody here knows the story of Amazon e-commerce marketplace? Like very quickly, how did they start and how did they grow? Anyone? Anyone here knows the story of Amazon e-commerce marketplace and their growth? Yes, no?
No, sir.
Okay. Give me a thumbs up, guys, if you are still here. It's so weird to be just talking, and very disappointing as well to be just talking to a blank screen. But give me a thumbs up if you guys are still here. Guys, still here? Give me a thumbs up. Everything is good so far. All right, awesome. Okay, let's talk about the story of Amazon, right? So in the early 2000s, and I'm going to show you the beauty of the business model canvas and strategies. I'm going to show you how, when you put it into action, it actually makes perfect sense, and why, for example, we figure out the expenses and the revenue streams after having figured out everything else, and how that actually leads to very creative business strategies. So let's start with Amazon story, right? In the early 2000s, they wanted to be the best online e-commerce marketplace. Now, we are talking about the early 2000s, right? Most of you, some of you at least, were not even born during that time, right? And just to help you understand how prehistoric this is, in the early 2000s, it was extremely hard for you to, for example, find an online hosting space, like those kind of stuffs did not exist. So Amazon realized that in order to become the best e-commerce marketplace, they are going to end up having huge infrastructure costs, because they are going to have to create their own infrastructure. You didn't have virtual servers, you didn't have, for example, VPS services and things like that. Those things did not exist. So there was a huge infrastructure cost for Amazon to build their own server, infrastructure in order to be the best. While doing that, they realized that they will have to, of course, create internal systems, right? Because back in the day, if you wanted to plug in or host your application onto an external server, you actually had to drive, like you had to sit in a car, you had to go to the server farm, and you had to connect plugs in order to have your application hosted live. That is how it worked, right? And this, the cost of doing that was insane, including Facebook. If you guys have not read about the history of Facebook, which is Meta now, and how it was formed, there's actually a part where Mark Zuckerberg and his team drives to the server farms to connect physically. They connect, they and set up the new servers in order for them to be active. In the early 2000s, very hard for you to do that. So huge infrastructure costs really sort of forced Amazon to start creating their own internal systems in order to reduce some of that cost. Now, while they were doing this, they suddenly realized that, hey, you know what? We wanted to be the best e-commerce marketplace, and we wanted to be an internet company, and we ended up facing the problem of infrastructure costs, because there are no virtual servers or stuff like that available, and we had to create our own internal systems. And we were lucky to have VCs fortunately funding us. They were like, there must be other companies also struggling with this problem, right? Other companies that want their digital internet products to be the best, but they're still struggling with infrastructure costs, and maybe they don't have what it takes to create an internal system. But there must be other people also facing the problem, other startup founders and other startup teams. So they realized that, what if we could set up almost like an OS for the internet? That's how they described it. This is way before concepts of having a virtual private server or any digital cloud server even existed. So they just described this as an operating system for the internet, where anybody can just plug in. You don't need to have your own internal infrastructure or systems. You can just plug in to a system that is available on the cloud, right? That's how they ended up creating AWS, because they were like, hey, you know what? We already have invested money in creating our own internal server system, which is the best and the fastest in the world. If you are a startup that is looking for something similar, instead of spending so much money on infrastructure costs and actually having to drive down to server farms, why don't you just use Amazon's web services, right? Like, all you have to do is, in just a few clicks, you are going to be able to, start having your own application hosted on our servers, and we will charge you money, which is nothing compared to the current infrastructure costs. And in return, you get the best service ever. AWS was born as a result of Amazon dealing with their own internal costs and internal systems. And they realized that we did this for us, and we may be able to rent it out to other people, and solve their problem. And therefore, we can bring down our own expenses. In fact, AWS became so successful that it generates more revenue than Amazon e-commerce marketplace right now. It was born out of a need for Amazon e-commerce marketplace, but it became so successful that the money AWS makes is more than the money made by Amazon e-commerce marketplace. In fact, it is such a big service right now. And I don't know if you guys know this, that Amazon Prime Video and Netflix, both of them are hosted on AWS. And think about it for a moment. Netflix and Amazon Prime Video are both video streaming services, and they both are in the same market. But Netflix, that could be considered a competitor, even though they're not, because Amazon Prime Video is a free service, right? You don't pay money for Amazon Prime Video. But in spite of that, competitor as well as their internal product, they are both hosted on AWS. So Netflix is actually a customer of Amazon, in spite of them competing in a sector which is an overlap, right? So that's how powerful this is. And that's just a story to show you the power of figuring out your expenses, your costs, and really pivoting, to the point where you will be able to identify alternate revenue streams for what you're doing that can actually sometimes bring a lot of value to your startup and take it to new heights. Cool. Any questions, guys? Any questions so far? We good? Yeah. Okay. Now, if you guys know this, I'm not going to spend too much time, but you can take a screenshot if you want to. That's basically an example of the business model canvas for Amazon.com, the e-commerce site. The pink post-its are for Kindle, and the yellow ones are for the Amazon e-commerce platform. You can take a screenshot if you want to. This is the business model canvas for Airbnb. Again, take a screenshot if you want to. These things are available online. You don't even have to take it from here. This is the business model canvas for Uber. If you're interested, just if you want to see how some of these successful startups also, you are able to break down their entire model, into this. In fact, one of the exercises that I would highly recommend that you guys do, just for you to be able to understand how some of these companies function, is just pick your favorite product or company out there, whatever it is. Like pick Netflix if you want to, if that's what you love, and try and do the business model canvas for Netflix. Do it on your own. And the reason I'm suggesting this is it'll force you to actually now start thinking of a product you use every day. You will stop thinking about it like a user, and you will start thinking about it like an actual founder. Try to fill out the business model canvas for Netflix, do some research. Once you finish what you have done, go online, you will find the business model canvas of Netflix. I'm pretty sure available on the internet. Check what you have on your sheet with what actually Netflix does out there, and it'll help you understand a lot about how these companies function, but it'll also help you identify gaps in your own understanding of how basically businesses are run. Just an exercise that you guys should try out by yourselves. It's going to really help you close your gaps in your understanding. Yeah. Okay. Now, coming back to the BMC and going a little bit deeper into this, there are three things that I want to focus on, in the course of this workshop, and I'll be also speaking to you guys as we move into tomorrow. The three things that I want to focus on is your distribution channels, your cost structure, and your revenue streams. If you want to figure out finances and if you want to figure out budgeting, these are three very important aspects that you should focus on. And I'm going to help break them down a little bit for you so that you're able to exactly know what it entails and you're able to do a little bit of budgeting for it, right? If you've been with me so far. Now, let's start with the first, which is distribution channels, right? Or channels right there. Now, what does that mean? Distribution channel basically means how are your customers, your users going to find out about your existence? Just because you decide to build a product sitting in your college tomorrow doesn't mean that your users and customers will automatically find out about you, right? So you have to figure out a strategy for them to discover you. And then you will also have to figure out a strategy for you to reach out to them so that your value can reach the intended people for whom it is designed, right? That's what distribution channel basically means. Now, when it comes to your distribution channel, there are actually 5 stages, and I'm going to break it down for you. knowing these 5 stages are very important because most people don't realize the nuances involved in real customers using a product or service, and it's just important for you to figure these things out. Okay. Having said that, when it comes to distribution channel, the first phase is called discovery. So a couple of questions that you should start thinking about is, how will your customers find out about your product or service? And at the same time, how are you going to make sure that they are thinking about you, even if they don't need you immediately? Which means, even if they are not ready to be your customers yet, how can you make sure that they are still engaging with your story and they're still engaging with your company? How can you ensure that you are still at the top of their minds, and they're constantly thinking about you, and they immediately know that they want you the moment that the need arises? One example that I can give you is, and this is something that I was speaking to a past team from the thingQbator program as well, where these people were building a mental health application and a platform, right? Now, mental health is, seeking help for mental health is very trigger based. Like something happens, and that's typically when people realize that their mental health is not exactly the best, and that's when you seek help. I mean, it's very idealistic. It's not always that linear. There's a lot of resistance as well, but it's very trigger based, right? It's not something very natural that you need every day. One of the things that I was working on with this particular team is, how can you continue being a source of mental health resources so that even if people are not your customers or not your users, your Instagram page still has the best memes, right, about mental health. It still has the best content. It still has the best educational resources. That's how a lot of people will end up discovering you, even if they don't need you immediately. But the discovery is very important, right? Not everybody is going to be your customer or your user, but how can you still be at the top of their minds, and how can you still ensure that people interact and engage with you? Very important for you to figure out, which is discovery. Now, once people have found out about you, you want to move to the next phase, which is evaluation, which is it possible for customers to experience your product even before they buy it? Can there be a demo, or can they get some kind of a feeling of what does your product, how does it feel, to take your service, and how can you make that as easy as possible? Now, for software products, it's typically very simple. It's usually a trial period, so as to speak. For example, Netflix offering 1 month free. All of this stuff is basically a way for people to evaluate your product before they choose to buy it. But if you're a service company, there are also other means for people to get at least some experience of what does your product and service feel like before they actually buy it. Now, before all of these things, one very important piece of evaluation that most founders forget about, and which is what I want to bring to light, is that one of the biggest forms of evaluation, especially in the world we live in today, which is so connected, is that people are going to evaluate you as a founder and decide if it is worth it to pay for your product or service. Remember when I said the shortest distance between two people is a story? People actually evaluate founders as well. Like, think about it. If you are a founder that, for example, has inappropriate behavior, you're going to get cancelled, and nobody's going to buy your product or service. It doesn't matter how well you designed it, right? It happens all the time in the world around us. But not just that, people actually evaluate you by your values. Think about it. If you meet a group of students, and students are going to be your customers or your users, whatever, and if you come across as an extremely rude person, nobody's going to even end up buying your product or service. Like, you can forget about it. Please remember and understand the fact, and I keep reminding this to first time entrepreneurs, it may sound trivial, like why am I talking about this in such a technical workshop, but you embody your company. You are directly, it's part of a whole and whole of a part, right? You represent your company. You represent what you're building. You and your product is one thing. It's not two separate entities, right? You and your company is literally one thing. So the way you behave, for example, I'm pretty sure that you guys have an idea of what meetings in my company must feel like if you were a part of my team. I'm pretty sure you know that already because you've seen me in action, right? And it's who I am. People do that all the time, and I would really recommend that you think a lot about yourselves as well, because you directly represent your company, and I mean, it's a make or break in a lot of cases, right? So evaluation, but again, bringing it back to the point, you need to figure out a way for customers to experience your product, maybe see a demo, or experience it in some other way before they make up their minds that they want to pay for it. Discovery हो गया, evaluation हो गया. इसके बाद the next thing you want to figure out is purchase, which is how will your customers buy your product or service. It's very important that you figure this out because it also begs to answer the question, for example, will your customers have to pay upfront? Can they pay cash on delivery? Do they have to pay the entire amount at once? Do you allow them to break up the money that they have to pay into installments, right? Is it subscription? Is it a one-time payment? Is it free in the beginning and then you charge them for maintenance, right? How does the purchase happen? Is it happening online? Do they have to pay by card? Can they pay by crypto? Like, what really is your form of purchase and how can you make this as easy as possible for them, right? So you figure out purchase. Once you do that, you want to figure out delivery, which is how will your product or service be delivered to your customer, and is there any kind of setup involved? A lot of people ask me the question that if you're an internet company, if you're making an app, then how does the delivery really matter? And I want to just remind everybody here about something I mentioned in my previous workshops, which is your product is not your solution. It's a part of the solution, but your solution is way more than just your product or just your app. And when I speak about delivery, I'm speaking about delivery of your solution. How can you make it easier for people to contact, for example, your customer service? How can you make sure that they're able to really see the full value? How do they, for example, if you were Netflix, how do you ensure that people find out about new releases on your platform? There's a lot of things that you need to think about. So think about it from a solution perspective and not a product perspective. And if you've done that, you want to finally get into support, which is what kind of support are you going to provide? Will you even provide support in the first place? Is it required? For example, if you are selling Nataraj erasers, you don't need to provide support. There's no return or replacement for it, right? But it's just a question you should ask and figure out that you have the answers for it. So when it comes to distribution channel, there's discovery. How will people find out about you? Evaluation. Can they get an experience before they choose to pay for it? Purchase. How are they going to pay for it? And how can you make it easier? Delivery. How will you actually deliver the value? And then support. Will you provide any post-delivery support? And if yes, how will you execute it? 5 things you need to figure out for your distribution channel. I want to stop there for a minute and see if you guys have any questions. Any questions related to your projects, anything that doesn't make sense, any questions at all? Any questions, guys?
Sir, can you explain support once again?
Yes. So Shivani, support is basically, we are talking about post-delivery support. Now, in the case of physical services, physical startups, it's pretty simple to understand, right? Like, is there any kind of customer care that you're offering? But even in the case of internet companies, we are really talking about how will you support your customers to still continue getting the best out of your product even after they've paid for it for the first time? Where do they go if they face any problems? Can they call customer care? Is there a customer care helpline number? Who do they get in touch with for refunds? Who do they get in touch with if they need help setting up your product or service? I don't know if you guys know this, but Bose, the sound system company, right? Bose, very back in the day, like many years ago, they had a service where if you ordered for a Bose surround sound home theater system, the Bose team would actually come and visit your house, right? And they would measure your, for example, the living room where you want to install your speakers. They would measure it and they would actually test the audio resonance, echo reflection, the wall positions and all of that. And then they would recommend the best home theater system that fits into the kind of room you have. Of course, that was just an experience which was unsustainable and unscalable. But what I'm trying to say is that in the very early days, they wanted to really put out the value that they are the best in the business and that they make extremely custom, experiences, for people who are actually, audiophilic, like people who are audiophiles, people who love music and love like, listening to the nuances and sound quality. Bose used to be a company and in a way still is a company that caters to them. So that's how they kind of set up their whole delivery support purchase system, where they would physically come and visit your room, take measurements, and then recommend what kind of home theater system fits best, where you should place your speakers, to get the best out of the experience. But the reason I'm giving you this example is because there are many strategies in place for you to do this. If you are making, let's say, an app that helps student founders find investors, right? When it comes to support, you may also start offering, for example, courses on entrepreneurship. It has nothing to do with your actual app, but if people end up taking courses on entrepreneurship, students, they will anyway be able to create better companies. If they create better companies, investors on your app are going to find better startups, which is going to lead to more investments, which is going to lead to more value for everybody on your ecosystem, which leads to more success for your companies. So if you're making an app that helps student founders, find investors more easily, then technically speaking, you should also have entrepreneurship programs, maybe a support, just to help people do that. It's just an idea off the top of my head that I keep saying in a lot of workshops. And maybe I'll make it someday. But yeah, that's what I mean by support, Shivani. Just seeing how can you offer more value to your customers so that they can remain your customers even after they've made their first purchase, if that makes sense.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions before we move forward? By the way, a quick time check. I'm going to end in like about 15 minutes or so. Yeah.
Sir, I had a question.
Yes.
So when we are speaking of, let's say, the evaluation part, where we are talking of how we can provide a customer experience of a demo. So, sir, when we're
Uh-huh.
speaking of something outside of a SaaS product, like my own project, which is about giving a maid service.
Yeah.
Sir, if we try to do the demo session, will it not affect our unit economics as a startup?
Yeah. Yeah. Reliance
So, sir,
Hands
how
is what
should
your
we go
name
about
is.
it?
Where Reliance Hands is what I remember you from the last workshop. What is your name again?
Himanshi, sir.
Himanshi, right? So Himanshi, if I'm not wrong, we had a mentorship session, right, regarding your project.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So Himanshi, that's a good question. So just for everybody else to understand, Himanshi is asking the question that she has this project that she's working on, she and her team, which provides high quality domestic workers to urban, urban customers, and in a way also helps provide, a more organized, working system for the domestic workers themselves, right? And her question is, in this case, how do you really do an evaluation even before you make up your mind? So Himanshi, to answer your question, there are two kinds of evaluation, right? Evaluation when you are directly actually using the service and evaluating it. In your case, it would mean that like for example, hiring a domestic worker for a day and seeing their work and then deciding whether you want to use them or not, which is actually pretty simple to do. And this is something that most families anyway do. I don't know if you must know this, that for example, if my mom wants to hire a new domestic worker, she's going to look at two or three options, and she's even going to invite them to actually maybe help her out for like 2 or 3 days in order to see if it's really working out or not. And then if it is not working out, she will pay them for 3 days and she will let them know that this is not going to work out. And if it does end up working out, she's going to let them know that we're going to continue with you. This is something that people anyway do. And of course, it will be possible, Himanshi, for you to also sort of standardize this to make sure that the domestic workers are getting the respectful, payment that they do deserve for that service, without cutting any corners, while at the same time ensuring that your users are able to sort of evaluate and see, the quality of service provided by your company. That's number one. But the second thing is that you can also evaluate a service without taking it. Now, this kind of evaluation, of course, stems from how well you have designed your user flow. For example, how easy is it for people to look at the information related to the different domestic workers available on your platform so that they can make a decision? Can they look at their verified documents? Can they look at their past experience? Can they look at testimonials by other people who have taken their service? How easy are you making it for them to find relevant information and evaluate that information before even choosing to opt in for your service? So both of those evaluation options are open for you, Himanshi, and your project, and you should consider both of them.
Thank you, sir. So my last curiosity question would be, what kind of support, or what is the terminology given to the support which is given before you purchase a service?
What do you mean? Like support? You mean customer care support?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. What is that terminology for the support which is given before the delivery?
I mean, it really doesn't matter. You just call it support. That's completely okay. You call it onboarding support, for example. That's a term that that's a phrase that a lot of companies use. Where, to give you an example, Amazon actually in India has one of the best seller onboarding processes. It's very simple for you to get onboarded as a seller on Amazon, and their team has taken a lot of effort to kind of design that service, right? When Amazon actually launched in India, and they still do that in a couple of smaller towns as well, where they have this sort of van that goes into these towns, which is the Amazon onboarding service van, and they speak to the sellers and they teach them how very quickly you can open an account on Amazon and you can start selling your products online in just a few clicks. So that's the kind of support provided even before you become their customer. And if you want to talk about a purely SaaS product, I think if you guys have used Google Pay, Phone Pay, Paytm, or any of these other UPI apps recently, the kind of onboarding experience that they have where you're setting up your UPI accounts is super fast. Like they've just really figured it out to a point where all you really need is to put in your phone number and they will identify all the banks connected to the phone number and they will immediately get you in with just like 1 or 2 OTPs, right? That's how fast it has become, right? So support can be both support through actual services, which means having a team that helps with stuff like seller onboarding. Support can also sometimes mean making the onboarding process easier through features, which is something that some of these apps like Google Pay and Phone Pay is doing. And at the same time, support can sometimes just be having good relationships, with these people. So this could be through social media, being extremely active, answering questions, building a community, doing workshops, those are support as well. There's no phrase used for this, but it's basically just pre-sales support is what I would call it. Himanshi.
Got it, sir. We were just confused as we wanted to write it in the pitch as a feature.
Yeah, you should just call it pre-sales support.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, guys, before we move forward? Any other questions? By the way, Ramana, I just noticed that you're here. Hi. Any other questions? No, we good? Okay. Now, let's move on, right? This is a question that I either get asked a lot or I don't get asked at all. And both the cases are slightly concerning for me because if you are not thinking about what you are measuring, there is absolutely no way you can decide where you're going to spend your money and what you're going to budget for, number one. The second is the fact that so many people ask me this question means that there's also a lot of confusion around this and there's no shame in admitting it. We're all first-time entrepreneurs. I have been there. I know how complicated these things can get and how difficult it is for you to understand. But nevertheless, my point being, it's very important for you to also define how are you going to measure the success of your product so that bringing it back to how we started this conversation in the first place is so that you can actually decide where you're going to spend your money and how you're going to budget for features or how you're going to budget for people that's going to help you fulfill some of those key success parameters. So KPIs, right? Key performance indicators. There's a lot of things on the internet that is said about KPIs, and also it's a concept that seems very complex, especially like when you get into more corporate KPIs and stuff like that. But I want to bring it back to what it means in context of the stage that you guys are in, right? Especially if you're a student entrepreneur, student product designer making a product for the first time. Now, very simply put, a KPI is an indicator. It is a quantitative metric that you measure, which tells you how well your product is performing, right? It's a very quantitative metric. Now, there's this quote that I kind of love, which is by Adora Shong, who is one of the partners at Y Combinator, which is she says that there's there's a mistake that a lot of first time founders make, which is they end up trying to do too much. You're always constantly trying to do too many things. You have too many features, and you're trying to track too many metrics. But it is actually better to track just one metric, which tells you most of the things you need to know about how well your product is performing, than to, like, let's say, track 10 metrics, which only tells you about 91%. What this actually means is it is very important for you to pick the right metric, that you should track. Like, what are you going to really measure, which tells you how well your product is performing? And if you know what you're going to measure, it's very easy for you to backtrack and figure out what features you need to prioritize, what kind of team members you need to hire, and of course, how can you streamline your product a little bit more, which will also give you more control on your budget and really make sure that you're spending it in the right and the most appropriate places. Now, there are some characteristics of a good metric, right? Like there are some characteristics that all good metrics have, and it's important for you to kind of spend some time thinking about it. And I'll show you a few examples of good metrics and really bring the conversation back to how can you apply this to your projects. Now, some of the characteristics of a good metric, number one is that it represents delivery of real value. Now, this seems very common sense. Of course, अच्छा indicator वही होता है जिससे customers को value मिल रहा है कि नहीं पता चलता है. But believe me, and I have made this mistake myself when I started my first company as a student, we do not understand what delivery of real value means, right? We're very confused. You may end up making a healthcare app which is supposed to make the lives of patients easier, but you may end up spending so much time just figuring out what database to use and what to do in the backend that you forget that at the end of the day, you are an app that is supposed to serve patients. Your goal is not to become the app with the best backend. That is just a very tertiary requirement. It's not even a secondary requirement. We very easily get distracted from what the real value is because we are all engineers and we are very technical about the products that we are building. But you have to keep reminding yourself why you started making your project in the first place, what problem are you solving, and who are you solving it for. Very easy to get distracted, but please just bring it back to focusing on, is it really offering real value, and can you measure it? A good metric is something that captures recurring value. So what that means is, and I mentioned it earlier when we were discussing business models, it's not just enough for you to have a customer or a user that uses your product once. You want to actually have customers and products that keep coming back, to the solution that you're offering. You want repeat customers. You want customers that renew their subscription, right? And the only way to do that is by choosing a metric that shows you repeat behavior. It's very important for you to measure repeat behavior. You don't want to just measure how many people, let's say, booked an order using your app once. You want to actually measure how many people booked repeat orders. That's super important, for you to measure that. Otherwise, it's not a good metric. You also want to choose an indicator which is called a lagging indicator. It's a technical term, but a lagging indicator basically means that if you have spent the last 3 months making some product decisions, making some decisions about hiring some new team members, your indicator should help you look backwards and actually measure if the decisions you took in the last 3 months, whether they were actually fruitful or not. Your indicator should very clearly tell you that either you're making the wrong hire, you don't have the right team. It should be able to tell you that all of your product decisions in the last 3 months were wrong, or it should be able to tell you that this new feature that you added is actually really helping push the success of your product. It should be an indicator that helps you as a founder look backwards at all the decisions you've made in the last 1 week, 1 month, 3 months, everything that the company has done. And you should be able to actually measure whether that is contributing to the success or whether it's hindering it. And of course, it has to be a practical feedback mechanism. Again, I'll show you some examples to show how important this is. But your indicators, whatever it is that you're measuring, you should be able to use it to give some actual solid feedback to your team. You really should be able to use it to give practical feedback. You should be able to give them direction. What are we doing wrong? What are we doing right? What do we need to fix? It has to be connected to a practical feedback mechanism. So it's important for you to select indicators. And of course, last and most important point is please do not pick a vanity metric like app downloads. All of you guys by this point should know this. App downloads don't mean anything. It means absolutely nothing if you have 1 million app downloads because it doesn't tell you anything about usage, right? So yeah, just a couple of things to keep in mind. Take a screenshot of this if you want to. And of course, very generic, but two metrics that most software startups, for example, use to measure is revenue and daily active users. But again, I'm going to deconstruct what these mean because revenue and daily active users can mean very different things for Himanshi's startup versus Shivani's startup versus, for example, Supriti's startup. It can mean absolutely 3 different things, right? Take a screenshot. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to take these concepts and maybe give you guys a chance to challenge your own understanding. I'm going to give you 2 examples of companies that all of us know about, right? Like these are companies that all of us know about. We've even used it multiple times. And I want you to now start thinking like a founder of these companies and tell me what would you really measure in order to have an indication of how well your product is performing. So the first product that I want to look at is Uber. We all know what Uber is. We've all used it. My question to you guys is, consider yourselves as leading the product team of Uber, right? Consider yourself the founder of Uber if you want to, the product head of Uber if you want to, chief product officer of Uber if you want to. If you are a leader in that position, what would be some metrics that you would measure which tells you how well has Uber been performing as a product in the last 1 month, right? What would be the metrics that you would measure? Yes, Himanshi.
Sir, I'd be measuring a number of cabs in a day and number of
Okay.
1-star feedbacks given in a day.
So Himanshi, you would be measuring number of cabs in a day and the number of 1-star feedback given in a day. Okay, fair. Anyone else? What would you measure if you were the founder of Uber?
How many customers book the cab or auto anything from Uber?
How many customers booked a cab or an auto from Uber? Shivani, would you measure that in a day, in a week, in a month?
Yes, in a day it will be better to compare with the other days.
Okay, so you measure it in a day. Fair. Anyone else? What would you measure if you were the founder of Uber?
How many drivers are added to the company?
Pasumarthi, good to hear your voice again, man. But how many drivers are added to the company, you said?
Yes, I mean, they will.
Okay. And I'm assuming in a month?
Yes.
Okay, fair. Thank you. Anyone else?
How many new users have joined and who are the repeating ones? Like, unka measure.
Who are the new users who have joined in and who are the repeating ones? Do you want to define how would you measure repeating ones? Can you deconstruct that?
If it's a long time period, if we are considering over a year or something, we can see how frequently the users are using the service, that is Uber.
Okay. Okay. So you would be seeing how frequently somebody is using the service, that is Uber. So I'm guessing you're looking at number of cabs that a user would book over the course of 1 year, right?
1 year. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Awesome, Shatakshi. Thank you. Anybody else wants to try? What would you measure if you were the founder of Uber? Any other guesses? Okay. Pasumarthi, let me ask you this question. Why do you think it's so important for you to measure number of new drivers added?
Yeah, sir, it's important because the drivers are become more and more, and it indirectly helps the company. And even with a short period of time, the people think that they will. I mean, one person is ordered the ride, and in a short time, he's going to get that service from the like Uber company, right?
Okay.
So it indirectly increases the value of the company from the
Okay.
customers too.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. So you feel that drivers are important for you to get the value across in the first place. Low drivers mean less value, more waiting time, all of that stuff. So you feel drivers are important. Okay, fair. Himanshi, I want to go back to your answer once, and I want to see why did you choose the two metrics that you choose, Himanshi?
Sir, since Uber is not the only one in the market, and me
Yeah.
specifically being in Bangalore for last 3 years, I've seen a lot of ride being cancelled.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say how many successful rides happen would be a very good metric to see.
Okay.
And second would be 1-star feedback, or just let's just say a complaint. So how
Right.
many complaints given in a day? Because I personally have given a lot of complaints too.
Okay. 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 Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you so much. All right. Now let me give you the answer. Okay. But before I give you the answer, let me teach you a trick that you can use whenever you're thinking about companies like this and you're trying to analyze, like you're really trying to put yourself in the founder's shoes. And more importantly, it's a trick that you can apply to your startups as well and your projects as well. First thing to do is answer the question, what are the different user types on your app, on your product, whatever, and look at it from both the demand as well as the supply side. So if I take a step back, when it comes to Uber, first of all, there are two kinds of users of Uber. There are drivers and then there are riders, right? People who book cabs and people who offer cabs, right? Two different segments. Whenever you're thinking of measuring, because you're trying to measure how well your startup is going to perform, you need to choose metrics from both of those sides. If you're not measuring both demand as well as supply, there's absolutely no way you can make a decision, right? No way. So the first thing that you should do is break it down into your demand and your supply side, and then try to answer what would be the metrics that you would pick up in order to measure. And the point again being, remember, you don't want to measure too many things. You want to measure the most important metrics that actually tell you everything that you need to know about how well your company is performing, or at least tells you the most important things that you need to know. So if I'm going to apply that logic and also apply all of these things that we just looked at, which is it needs to be an indicator that shows repeat behavior, right? Not one-time behavior. It has to be repeating. And it has to have, a real value, a measurement of real value. It has to be a very practical feedback mechanism. So if I apply all of these concepts, my first set of indicators are going to be on the demand side, right? And the two things that I should pick as the founder, number one is rider retention, which means what is the percentage of riders that actually booked a cab after their first cab? That tells you everything, by the way. If, for example, let's assume a scenario where you have 100 users, new users on your platform, right? And then you actually find out that only 20% of the new users have booked a second cab after their first one. With that new percentage of repeat behavior, you get to learn a lot more about the product or service that you're offering, right? You actually get to understand that only 20% of people, out of the 100 found real value in, being an Uber customer and actually ended up booking a cab. As opposed to, like, let's say finding out that 80% of new customers actually book a second and a third cab after their first Uber ride, right? So you want to measure rider retention, and retention is a phrase, customer retention is a phrase that everybody uses around the world. But if I'm really able to simplify it, it brings down to something like this: what percentage of your customers take your service after they take it for the first time? That percentage is very important for you to measure. Similarly, you also want to measure trips per active rider, which means what is the total number of rides per active customer on your platform, right? So if you find out that you have 100 new customers on the platform, that is great. But then you also want to measure what is the average number of rides any person takes on this platform. And if you find that the average number of rides per active customer is, let's say, 5, and you make a few decisions, you make a few product changes, and then 3 months later you find that the average number of rides per customer is now 60, which means 60 rides per customer on average in the last, like, let's say 6 months or so. it's an indicator that can help you really assess and go back to your team and tell them that, hey, it looks like our number of rides per customers went up, which means that our feature product changes, whatever we did is working, and let's continue moving in that direction, right? So top two metrics you should pick is rider retention and trips per active rider. Similarly, on the supply side, you should now start looking at driver retention, right? Which is what Pasumarthi you were trying to get at, but it's not just enough for you to measure what is the total number of like drivers on the platform. It doesn't tell you anything. What you need to understand is what percentage of drivers actually continue being on Uber and end up taking more rides after their first ride, because it is going to tell you how their first experience was. It's going to tell you whether they trust the system. It's going to tell you whether their payments, they are able to understand how the app works. It tells you everything that you need to know, as opposed to just measuring total number of drivers, right? So that's what you want to measure next. And of course, you also want to look at trips per active driver, which is what is the total number of trips that a driver does on average over a certain period of time. Because the more that number is, it means the more they're using Uber. And this just tells you how successful your product is, at that point. So recap, you break it down into demand and supply side. You really try to understand the users you're dealing with, and then you select metrics that help you measure both. Why is this so important, by the way? Because applying this again back to budgeting will very clearly help you understand that when you're doing a budgeting, you're going to have to look at both sides, which means that how do we make the experience better for your riders? Yes. But at the same time, how do you get more drivers onto the platform? How do you get your experience, better for them? What features do you need to develop? How should your user flow be? And all of the other decisions that you need to make in order to get that better. Of course, I'm going to get into the budgeting and the finances part for each of your projects specifically during the mentorship session tomorrow, but just some tricks to keep in mind in terms of what you're measuring that can help you take those decisions later, right? Let's try this one more time, and I'm going to pick a different example in this case, and I want to pick Airbnb, right? Most of you guys know what Airbnb is. If you were the founder of Airbnb, what metrics would you choose to measure and why?
So same could work, right?
It could. You tell me, what are the
Same
metrics you
as
would
Uber.
choose and why?
So because it also has both ends, the one who are actually going like the end user and the ones who are being a part of Airbnb and taking care of them.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, two clients.
Mm-hmm. And what would you measure for them? So Himanshi, before you answer that question, just for everyone to know, Airbnb's model basically has two sets of users. So you have hosts. Hosts are basically people who list their platform on Airbnb, and they are the ones who take bookings and they earn money through the bookings that they get for their properties, right, on Airbnb. So those are hosts. And then you have guests. Guests are people who book these properties on Airbnb, and they have a place to stay and they pay money, and Airbnb takes a commission out of it, and the hosts end up getting the money for it. So you have hosts. Those are people who list their own properties on Airbnb, and then you have guests, which are users that book these properties and stay in them, right? So yeah, Himanshi, back to you.
So similarly, as an Uber, Airbnb is a thing on a different spectrum because it can have a lot more criminal issues than an Uber ride. Because
Sure.
people are
Okay.
literally going there to stay there in a different country where they know
Okay.
nothing of. So
Okay.
I think how many people actually use it after the first booking will tell us a lot if they actually feel safe or not. And the second thing also, how many bookings per user are they actually willing to do?
Okay. So how many bookings per user? And of course, you're talking about the safety aspect of this as well. All right, Himanshi, thanks. Anybody else wants to give it a shot? By the way, suggestion, we're talking about metrics, which means they are quantitative terms. When you're trying to construct your answer, be as specific as you can, because it's quantitative. It needs to be something that can be measured. What would you measure if you were the founder of Airbnb, and why? Anybody else wants to try? Anyone else wants to give it a shot? All right, let me break down the answers, okay? So again, supply side and demand side. On the demand side, you have your customers, your guests. So you would want to measure something called the rebook rate, which is basically what percentage of customers book a property through Airbnb again after they've booked it the first time. And this takes care, Himanshi, of your concern of safety. If they stayed there for the first time and the experience was good, they will have the confidence, and the desire to book through Airbnb again. So it's a very good metric that tells you a lot of things. It tells you how the experience was, and it also helps you measure some real value. Also, you want to look at nights booked per user, which is what is the total number of nights a user books over a certain period of time. Nights, because that's how the hotel industry works. 3 nights, 2 days is how you talk, right? So you want to see what is the total number of nights booked per user, which tells you how active they are on Airbnb. So remember, we had this whole question of daily active users, which is what most people keep talking about. But what does that mean? The daily active user for Uber means the number of rides per active user over a certain period of time. But the daily active user for Airbnb means total number of nights booked per active user over a certain period of time. So it's very different depending on the context of the product and the project that you're building. Similarly, on the supply side, you want to look at active hosts, which is what is the percentage of hosts that are active, after they had a guest for the first time. Because if they had a property and they had a guest that came in and set fire to the house, they're not going to want to be on Airbnb anymore, right? So what percentage of hosts are active after their booking? And you also want to see what percentage of hosts are active at any given point of time, which is a much better metric to measure, which means at any given point of time on Airbnb, you should be able to say that we have 60 property listings on our platform, out of which 50% are full. That's a good metric to measure. It means that at this point of time, 50% of all your listings currently have a booking that is ongoing. Similarly, you want to look at bookings per active host, which is the number of bookings that every active host gets over a certain period of time. And you want to make sure that the number of bookings is as high as possible. That is the reason why Airbnb launched its photography service, because Airbnb realized that if the photographs of the property looks bad, then customers don't feel like booking there. Every customer wants to look at photographs of a property before they make up their mind that they want to stay in it, which is why Airbnb has professional photography services where they're going to come in and they're going to take really high quality photos, and they're going to structure the photos and your house, and they're going to make it look much better so that it attracts more bookings. That's how they realize that it's a service that people would want to pay for, and it came because they were measuring bookings per active host, right? Now, I don't know if you guys realize this, but there is one metric which is missing from here, and I think it is something that Himanshi mentioned, which is why are we not measuring reviews? Any guesses why that's not a top metric that Airbnb is measuring? Any guesses? Why are we not measuring reviews?
I think so, because it depends on person to person as well. Some
Depends
people
on-
just give the review just
Okay.
like that. They might not like one thing and they might just give a bad review.
Yeah, they might not like one thing which has nothing to do with the service, and they may leave a bad review. Fair, Himanshi. Yes, Shivani.
Reviews, it should be taken care by host, not the person who creates Airbnb.
The review is the responsibility of the host and not of the founder of Airbnb. Very interesting point. Thank you for sharing that, Shivani. Anyone else? Anyone else wants to try? Okay, so Himanshi and Shivani, you're both correct. So basically the reason why as a founder, review is not something that you will measure comes down to 3 very important points, and 2 of which you guys have already spoken about. The first point is that reviews are extremely subjective, right? Metrics are quantitative indicators. It's not qualitative indicators. Reviews are very qualitative. It's very subjective. You can't measure reviews, right? Not even 1 star and 2 star, by the way, because it means different things to different people. Let me give you an example. Some guests love hotels where the staff is extremely friendly and extremely cooperative and extremely helpful, while some other guests might like a property or a hotel where the staff likes to give you privacy and doesn't interfere too much into what you're doing. it really is a question of personal preference. I may give a bad review because the staff was too friendly, right? But someone else may give a 5-star review because the staff was friendly. So it really depends. What people want is very subjective. So it's not something you can control. It's very qualitative, number one. Second thing, as Shivani rightly pointed out, uh, the reviews are mostly about the host and their property. So it's actually the responsibility of the drivers in the case of Uber and the hosts in the case of Airbnb to pay more attention to their reviews, because that is a feedback mechanism for the drivers and for the hosts in the case of Uber and Airbnb. It's a feedback mechanism for them. It's about their service, and what they should be measuring. And of course, finally, Himanshi, as she mentioned, a lot of times it's not really a very accurate indicator of the service, because it is also very subjective. It doesn't really give you the whole truth, and you spend too much time looking at reviews. You end up, especially the founder in the early stages, measuring just the wrong things and not being able to scale your company, right? So focusing on the right metrics is super, super important. And you are going to be able to make a lot of decisions stemming from this, combining with your business model canvas, which is looking at all the operations, all the places where you need to spend money. You're now in a good position to be able to calculate your costs, your expenses, where exactly do you need to spend money and why. Look at your revenue streams, break all of that down, and of course, get into more nuances of budgeting, which is also connected to what you're measuring, because what you measure is what you prioritize, right? That's just how it works. Whatever you measure, whether it's in the case of your startup, in the case of your personal lives, whatever you're measuring is basically whatever you're prioritizing, and in our case is basically where you're going to be spending most of your budget in. So very important for you to keep these in mind. I'm going to stop right there, guys, and I hope this was useful and worth your time. Let me just very quickly share details of how you can reach out to me. Of course, I'm going to see you guys tomorrow again. In case you have any questions, please bring that to our session tomorrow. And I'm going to be spending some time speaking to each of you separately. So yeah, that's me right there. Best place to follow me is Instagram. I'm most active there, like all millennials. But you can also reach out to me on LinkedIn, email, whatever you want, if you want to learn more. And I hope this was worth your time. Thank you so much.
Before leaving the session, thank you, sir. It was a very wonderful session. Guys, please fill out the feedback form. Thank you, sir. Thank you, teams.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much. Any last thoughts, any last questions anybody has before we leave? I'll hang out for another minute or so. Any questions, anybody? Happy to hang out for longer if there's anything you guys want to discuss. Any questions? Any thoughts? No? We good? All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. See you tomorrow. Have a good evening.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.